Hello everyone, it's a great pleasure to be here meeting friends old and new. Almost 4 years ago, I gave a 5-minute lightning talk called The Myth of Transformation, right here at CapCHI. And today I'm so glad to be back to share more things I've been pondering since then. 4 years is not a short time. Now I have some more dots to connect around the topics of design, organization, and transformation. But before that, let me tell you a story about myself. When I was in the university studying computer science, I never thought I would end up being anything even remotely related to the role of a designer. I thought C++ was going to rule the world for the rest of my life, and I thought I've got a very good hand at it. But I was young and naive, and I was discontent. At the university, a good friend forced me into using Photoshop because he was the head of a communication unit. I graduated to become a software developer, crunching on Linux, early web, and embedded systems. I ended up answering requests on designing the splash screens for the systems developed. I believed there must be more to life than that. So I accepted an offer to become a technical editor for a publishing house, where I went on to become acquisition editor, layout and book art designer, assistant editor-in-chief, and creative director. That was my first dip in what we now call service design, organization design, and brand design. I still believed there must be more to life than that. Thanks to a close friend's recommendation, I landed on a UX designer job in a startup who was using Adobe Flash as the front end. I learned Adobe Flash 1 week before I started my first day there. From there, I went on through companies big and small to become UX manager, product manager, UX lead, and service designer and strategist. My parents were either annoyed or enraged by my decisions to pivot to uncharted trajectories. Fortunately, they were supportive. I evolved to become a designer, just like most of my fellow designers did. We are becoming designers only because we never stopped learning. Becoming a designer is a journey of learning, no matter where you happen to start. Even when you're already become the person everyone considers a master, you still wake up every morning knowing there's no such thing, that you are only a master because you never stop learning. Not only is becoming designer a journey of learning, so is designing itself. In order to make genuinely informed decisions when we design, we must understand a lot more than what's on the surface. So what's on the surface? Design processes, techniques and methods, tools of the trade, jargons and fancy job titles. But even framing design as problem solving is not enough. Early hopes that by describing design as problem solving, we had captured its essence were in the end not justified. The problem solving models of design are particularly helpful when you want to control a design process, or to make your design project run more efficiently. But the problem-solving model is silent when we want to know more about design than just how to control and structure it. Looking back on my career journey, I realize that it's always the next bigger context that drives me forward, all the way to where I am now. When I was designing user interfaces, I thought, what's the use of great user interfaces if the interactions were poorly designed? When I was designing interactions, I thought, what's the use of great interactions if the user flow itself was flawed? When I was designing the user flows, I thought, what's the use of great processes if the product was poorly designed? When I was designing the product, I thought, what's the use of great product if the business strategy was crappy? When I was designing the business strategy, I thought, what's the use of all this if the organization had toxic culture, poor management, and unhappy employees? So as a designer, my interest has been constantly shifting towards the next bigger context. My current interest is in transformation, power in organizations, and activism at workplace. So in the following minutes, I'm going to share with you my observations and thinkings on a few relevant topics, all connected by design. The first topic is about design in organizations. But here I'll move away from my public servant point of view. I want to talk about organizations in terms of a business. There is an asymmetry between business and design. When we talk about design, we can say it's a universal human activity, and in a much narrower sense, it's also a professional activity of creating things. Well, the notion of doing business is just an umbrella term that includes management, marketing, designing, operation, strategy, and so on. Doing business includes designing. The traditional stratification of work follows the analytical approach of divide and conquer. And that approach goes to extreme in modern management. Hierarchical structures intentionally create encapsulated units of knowledge by delegation. Its worst case scenario becomes the silos. The notion of business people not designing is a rather new one. Before design was forcefully specialized into professions we're familiar with today, almost everyone in business designed university and professionally. Business used to understand design so well until large-scale managerial challenges and information overload started to hurt. In order to design professionally, designers always need to understand business. The ones who do not, cannot. Designers are not almighty. It's not possible for them to know and understand every business before they have a chance to work on something relevant. It's ridiculous to assume that designers should know business. Designers may or may not know business, but they can when it's necessary. In solving problems involving unfamiliar business domains, a designer grows new receptors to capture the business signals in the new business context, and therefore bond relevant business knowledge with their own design knowledge. That receptor mechanism in the design practice is how designers approach business understanding. It's naturally coupled with individual designer, and it's very difficult to scale on the organizational level. The act of designing is in every layer of a business: architecture, operation, management, and value creation. Unfortunately, many tend to focus merely on design in value creation, but ignore design in all other layers. Design in value creation is mostly easily seen and very friendly to the media. The visceral creativity fits well into the dramatic arc of the media rhetorics. No one loves to mumble about all the other pains in the asses. What's worse, perhaps, is to deny them by introducing bullshit. There are some fragments of an organization that have been designed. Those are good bright areas. The rest are just gray areas filled with bullshit because of the absence of meaning. People learned how to navigate those gray areas by bullshitting, and those areas must be intentionally designed. Anyone, regardless of their title, who works on those layers of design is the real designer in your business. The only way to scale the design capability, especially when an organization is transforming, is to orchestrate the design practices in all layers of an organization so that all of them support the receptor mechanism when carrying out design activities. Obviously, we cannot do that manually because we are already relying on digital technologies to communicate, coordinate, and collaborate. Only a transformable organization can sustain that receptor mechanism of the design capability on scale and afford the flexibility to reconfigure the design practice at each layer of the business. The way forward goes far beyond design. For an organization to become truly transformable, we need to reimagine the architecture. That's why I co-wrote a book about it. The second topic is about expertise under siege. When your doctor provides an official diagnosis on your health conditions, to what extent are you confident that your doctor is wrong and you are right? How confident would you be that you can win a golf match with Tiger Woods? To what extent do you think you can handle a lawsuit all by yourself without the help of your lawyer? You see, expertise, when applied, is a form of power. In fact, any sufficiently deep expertise is indistinguishable from power. Unfortunately, expertise-based power is often in direct competition with authority-based power that we commonly see in bureaucracy. We cannot talk about expertise without talking about power. The symptoms are simply everywhere. Designers like to complain. It's a good point, but it's also just half the point. As a designer, whenever you're asked to make things pretty, what you should actually do is to make things meaningful. It's just that sometimes you can indeed make it meaningful by making it pretty. Making things pretty is a vicious loop. The more you agree to it, the more you're asked to do it. After all, incompetent management's perception of design is just a self-fulfilling prophecy. Here's the bitter truth. It's not hard at all to make things pretty, but it's often much harder than expected to make them meaningful. Therefore, complaining about making things pretty is just half the point. The other half of the point is a question. Can you make it meaningful? In other words, regardless of whether you can make it pretty, can you make it meaningful? If you can make things meaningful by design, then you have a far better chance of helping people understand what design is really about. That is specifically the case when you clearly explain your design decisions to the satisfaction of your boss, your organization, or your client. Designing a presentation is a classic case. Ask any great speaker and they will tell you that it's not just about a nice deck. In fact, it's so not about a nice deck. It's the compelling stories. It's the fascinating ideas. It's the effective emotional charge. It's the elegant logic. It's the absorbing narrative. And all in all, it's the meaning of it. After all, making a deck pretty is merely easy. The hard part is making it meaningful. In more cases than many designers would like to admit, more people haven't even got to the stage where they care about whether something is pretty. In many cases, the things we designed are not even usable. Most designed things are only usable when they're meaningful. Sure, making something pretty do make people feel that it's more usable than it looks, but that's not often sustainable. People find out sooner or later. It needs to make sense first. Something makes sense only when it's meaningful. So how do you make things meaningful? There are at least 3 ways to achieve that. The first way is to ask Scott Berkhan's 4 questions of design. What are you trying to improve? Who are you trying to improve it for? How do you ensure you're successful? Who might be hurt by your work, now or in the future? Additionally, you can ask, what's the value? What problems does it solve? If it solves a real problem for some real people, then it's meaningful to them. The second way is to learn to frame and reframe the problem. If the current framing of the problem and/or the solution doesn't make any sense, then you have to reframe it to create meaning. You'll need to improvise and innovate. Both the innovation of solutions and the innovation of meaning help make design meaningful, just in different ways. The third way is to listen carefully and professionally. Sometimes meaning is a bit like fame. You don't find it, it finds you. Listening like a pro is one of the best ways to uncover meaning. There are certainly a lot more ways to make things meaningful. Hopefully, the 3 mentioned above get you started. It's certainly not easy, it takes a lot of practice. If you cannot make things meaningful, then maybe just try to make them pretty at the very least. Now let's talk about transformation. I once wrote a book on enterprise architecture, but what you didn't know is that the book was originally written with organizational transformation as the primary topic. It turned out to be too difficult, so my co-author friend and I decided to just scale back and write a book about architecture instead. But I do have a lot to share about my thoughts on transformation. Most organizations have 3 general courses of action. First, delivering values in return for economic, institutional, or social rewards. Second, optimizing internally and externally to sustain what works and obsolete what doesn't. And third, changing according to the dynamic, disruptive context in order to survive or stay on course, whatever that may be. The interactions among those three causes form the three existential pillars of an organization. Operation tries to make sure the organization delivers values and optimizes itself in a structured manner. Reformation and deformation tries to make sure the organization thrives in an effective, efficient, and sustainable way. Transformation tries to make sure the organization survives existential crisis and adapt to changed or new purposes. Delivering value is first and foremost operations' primary goal. Reformation and deformation, in aiming to optimize the operation, also indirectly deliver values. But transformation's primary purpose is never about delivering value. Instead, it's about evolving the organization by optimizing and changing constructs that are more foundational than operation. It's the formations of purpose, function, process, structure, and culture. As long as an organization frames transformation as delivering values, it is unlikely to become transformable, and its transformation is very unlikely to be successful. There were also three common misconceptions about transformation and its role in an organization. The first one is the value fallacy. The value fallacy claims that transformation initiatives are first and foremost about delivering immediate, tangible, and pleasurable values, and if you fail to deliver them upon timely request, your transformation effort won't be supported. Unfortunately, this notion has neither truth nor sense. The second one, the manageable imposter fallacy, substitutes reformation and deformation for real transformation. How many reorgs have you been through in the last year? Reformations and deformations are necessary instruments of change for an organization, but they are not transformation, plain and simple. The third, the power sensibility fallacy. It rejects any questioning or challenge to existing power structure or existing ways of operation. Of course, that's total bullshit, because transformation is exactly about changing the status quo, not about keeping it. As you can see, the value fallacy misconception can sound really rational and even compassionate, but transformation is more than just delivering value to your organization. It is a part of the organization itself, one that manifests itself in transformative behaviors and progressive mindset of its people, and plus much more. More often than not, delivered values are the indirect byproduct of positive transformation, which triggers a chain reaction from transformation to operation and then reformation and deformation. Avoiding any talks about power takes away the element of activism in the transformative efforts. Some might say, what's wrong with non-activism? We don't need no revolutions, for God's sake. But you know what? Good luck with changing the behaviors without changing the minds. Good luck with learning without making mistakes. And good luck with winning without taking risks. Now let's talk about leadership. Everything about being a leader is like being a parent. It is about committing to the well-being of those in our care and have a willingness to make sacrifices to see their interests advanced so that they may carry our banner long after we are gone. The quality of a leader becomes clear when they have to mediate a conflict between their team and their management. Good leaders will stick up for the team's vision and needs. Common leaders will rush to find the quickest compromise, whatever the cost, to the team. Leadership is not necessarily defined by what you do when everything goes well, but is, perhaps, defined more by what you do in a crisis. In a crisis, if you choose to save yourself instead of saving your team, then you don't get to talk about trust and loyalty. If you choose to avoid accountability instead of claiming the blame for your team, then you don't get to talk about integrity. If you choose to hide your mistakes instead of allowing your team to learn from them, then you don't get to talk about feedback loops. And even without a crisis, if you choose to put your team in check through metrics but won't allow them to put the same check on you, then you don't get to talk about an evidence-based approach. If you require justifications for the decisions your team made, but don't provide your own justifications to your team with the same rigor for your own decisions, then you don't get to talk about transparency. If you provide everything your team needs except the power to make binding decisions, then you don't get to talk about empowerment. If you define your team's strategies and plans without involving any of them throughout the process, then you don't get to talk about collaboration. If your only excuse for dumping crap on your team is that you had no choice, then you don't get to talk about support. If you allow toxic behaviors to persist in the team, then you don't get to talk about principles. If you use "it's above our pay grade" or "it is what it is" to explain away the deeper structural challenges, then you don't get to talk about motivation. Merely being in a position of leadership doesn't automatically make you a leader. Leadership is not only hard work, but also a high bar for being human. Leadership doesn't reveal who you want to be. It merely reveals who you really are. Taking responsibility for one's actions must happen at the time you perform your actions, not at the time you get caught. A startup founder once told me about his struggles. His fast-growing startup was facing many challenges, and one of the most pressing issues to him was his crumbling cultural hold on his own company, who was scaling up too fast. He felt like he's losing touch with his employees and with real consequences. Talented people he regarded as friends and allies walked away. That conversation triggered me to think about how a leader's personal culture can penetrate that middle management wall of subcultures. So I developed the concept of 3 roles: messenger, disciple, and ambassador. A messenger mediates information between the leader and the working level. A disciple preaches what the leader believes, and an ambassador accomplishes missions assigned by the leader. Those are the 3 roles leaders need to build their circle of influence, both for penetrating the middle management and for nurturing an environment for innovation. But now that I look back at it, I think that also applies to designers. In his blog post, The Last Designer, Scott Birkin has this to say: "Design education and design culture set many of us up to expect a different world than the real one. We often complain, 'I shouldn't have to,' 'why don't they,' or 'they just don't get it,' which can be healthy venting. But we forget that the word 'should' is an appeal to an authority, like a parent or boss. It presumes they have the wisdom to know better than their current behavior. This is our mistakes. As who exactly is this magical authority we are asking to do the right thing, and why do we expect them to know what is right? Or even if they know, to have the right incentives to want to do it? In fact, the authority almost never has the right incentives to do it." And Scott continues, "We forget that our knowledge isn't common, as we are experts in a specialized field. If we cannot convincingly explain the basics of our profession, why should we expect anyone in power to already grasp them? Where would they possibly learn? Where would they possibly learn them if not from one of us? Our job is literally to make things simple, effective, and beautiful. If we cannot do that in explaining design itself, whose fault is it? It's like we're linguists landing on an alien planet and are angry that they don't speak our language. We can decide it's a stupid planet, which might be true, and leave. But if we choose to stay, what if we think all the planets are dumb? Whose problem is it then? The quick answer is it's our problem, of course. We forget that every place we read about where designers have the level of respect we desire was shaped by a design pioneer who led the way. Who are the real design heroes? It's probably not keynote speakers or design luminaries who make us feel good and preach to the core. Instead, it's leaders who get less public attention, who persuade, teach, and gain the influence required to set up their design teams to succeed. If the workplaces we find ourselves in leave much to be desired, it simply means there is more pioneering to be done. Who is going to do it? So I'll end this topic by asking this question. As a design practitioner, what roles do we set ourselves up for? Are we the messenger, ambassador, and/or the disciple of good design? My last topic is activism. Activism is inherently transformative and it needs a political workspace to happen. Transformation needs activism for the simple reason that it is first and foremost about changing any status quo that clings to existential dead end. Let's not forget that once upon a time slavery was legal, homosexuality was illegal, women didn't have the right to vote. How confident should we be that our status quo is the right one to keep? I would say not confident at all. If your workplace is political, then there's no space for activism, which ironically is exactly what transformation needs. To what extent does your organization's workplace afford, encourage, and support activism? I know, not too much. Being political is about being conscious of power in organizations in actionable ways. It's about creatively imagining alternatives in the face of institutional corruption. It's about having radical hope on transforming the organization by nudging and challenging the status quo. Workplace doesn't want to be apolitical. Workplace needs to be political to change, evolve, and transform. You don't have to be an activist to be part of the progress. You just have to be political in that change of scene. And it just needs to happen by design. So that concludes my sharing. Thank you very much.